I hear everybody's points. My overall way of looking at it is it remains a perfect example of how I'm gonna break it down is like this. If you look around and you drive around the average suburban neighborhood, almost every house has a chimney, right? But I'm sure Luis would tell you. I mean, he does architecture. Most houses have chimneys, but they don't use them. They're not actual chimneys, right? Now, chimneys had a real purpose, which is why we still to this day build houses with chimneys, because chimneys were where people lit their fire and warmed their home. I think what we're not under, what where I miss everybody in this conversation is like everyone's not understanding that we now have gas heat, we now have electric heat, we now have solar, we now have fire, we have fireplaces, we got boilers, we got furnaces. There are several ways to heat a home today, but there are still builders who are just attached to this idea of building a house with a chimney, even though for most homes it serves no purpose. Now, everyone's going to make the argument, well, there are people who still use their fireplace. Sure, there are still people who use their fireplace, but the majority of them don't use it as the primary source of heat for their house. Why? Because even they understand, right, that that form of heating your home doesn't work with the times. There are new and sometimes even more efficient and better ways to heat a home than with a chimney. And to me, that symbolizes where marriage is today. Marriage is the chimney that everyone wants on the side of their home, even though 9 times out of 10, there's no fire in it. Even though 9 times out of 10, that house is being heated by that boiler, that house is being heated by that furnace, by oil, by gas, by natural gas, by solar, whatever. Most people don't even own an axe. Why? Because the traditional way of getting heat is no longer necessary. So when you want to heat your home, you're not going to sharpen up your axe and going to chop up tons of wood. Nowadays, when people do that, it's literally just as a novelty. They're just doing it for fun. More so as a form of like nostalgia and reminiscence. Like we're gonna go up to the cabin and we're gonna go cut wood and go light a fireplace to remember what it was like back in those days when we didn't have technology on that and all that, right? But the reality is we do. The reality is that that's where marriage is today. Marriage is that cabin in the woods that everybody has warm, fond thoughts of, but the majority of people don't actually want to live there, right? That's the reality. And I feel like until we accept that, we're not going to be able to move forward. The real purpose that we have to focus on is heating the home. That's what we need to focus on. How do we build strong, solid relationships between people and strong, solid communities? Marriage was once the vehicle to do that. However, I am of the belief that it's no longer the vehicle. And I think if we keep trying to focus on that, we're going to miss the opportunity to create a new and better vehicle to move communities forward. I'm going to land there.
Also, Clout, the chimney was also a place where people spent a lot of intimate moments and family bonding time in front of the chimney. They read, told stories, loved ones sat right in front of the fireplace. So it's a place of gathering. That's why it's always been symbolic, especially in modernity. You know, the chimney has always represented sort of like the focal point of the nuclear family.
Hmm.
So,
All right. Anybody else have any final
I,
thoughts?
I do have one final thought in reference to the video. So there was something that stuck out to me that I believe the gentleman said, where the parents and grandparents they needed each other. Luis touched on that. I think that is a problem as well. Is that we don't have the desire or want to need each other, or even the the concept of needing someone. Uh, Maybe it's a turn off because it seems too clingy or whatever the case may be. But for me personally, I I have always been big on the relationships in general. be it with family, friends, or my significant other. So if I choose, I think that in order for us to have a successful relationships, in order for us to have successful communities, we have to understand the need for each other. As they say, it takes a village to raise a child, but we don't have that village anymore because there's no need for it. Or everyone is so individualized. So if we're able to get back to being at a state of needing each other, then I think that will shift everything. My grandfather, he I didn't know him very well. He was he did his own thing, and he passed. And in my opinion, he passed in probably one of the worst ways possible. He lived alone. He was in his 50s, 60s, or something like that, I believe. And he passed when I was younger. So from what I know is that he was in the bathroom, slipped, fell, hit his head, and was dead before my mother found him maybe 3 or 4 days later. The fact that now, mind you, he was a player. He had hella women, whatever the case. He had hella sex tapes of him, cracking other women in the crib, all type of shit. He was a player. But for me, the message that I took from that was the fact that he didn't need his family. So in the glimpse of him not needing his family, he died alone, to where someone found him days later. They found, his daughter found his body days later because nobody heard from him. So I think if we get back to the values of having the values of community, of having the values of needing each other, the values of having relationships with each other, of gathering around the chimney, the fireplace. If we get back to that, then I think that that's how we save our culture, our society, our communities. And if I don't think that there's no other substitute for that, because there's the only the opposite of needing someone is individualism, and that's what we're experiencing now. So I don't think that there is something to replace that aside from us getting back to needing each other.